December 25th, 1944. A German prisoner of war stood in a Montana mess hall holding a strip of American bacon. His hand shook. Not from cold, not from fear, from something he couldn't name yet. He raised the bacon to his mouth, bit down, chewed slowly. Then Hauptmann Klaus Weber, a decorated Luftwaffe officer who'd bombed London, who'd sworn never to accept enemy charity, who'd told his men that Americans were soft, decadent, weak, did something that shocked everyone in that room. He wept. Not quiet tears, deep shoulder-shaking sobs. He set down the bacon, covered his face with his hands, and cried like a child who just remembered what home felt like. The American soldiers stood frozen, unsure whether to look away or step forward. Some had tears in their own eyes. Others just stared, trying to understand what they were witnessing. Because this wasn't the reaction of a broken man. This was something else. Something more dangerous to everything Klaus had been taught to believe. For 12 years, Klaus Weber had been taught that America was the enemy of civilization, that Americans were mongrels, weak, without culture or discipline. That German superiority was biological, inevitable, unquestionable. But on this frozen Christmas morning in Montana, one piece of bacon would shatter that lie. And 36 other German officers' men who'd flown combat missions, commanded battalions, killed Allied soldiers would face the same impossible truth. Everything they'd been told about America was wrong. What happened in that mess hall over the next 2 hours didn't just end hatred. It planted something more dangerous to tyranny than any bomb. Doubt. The kind of doubt that grows in darkness, that spreads like wildfire, that topples empires from within. This is the story of how real American bacon broke the Nazi propaganda machine, how 37 enemy officers discovered that freedom has a taste, and how one Christmas meal changed the course of the Cold War. What was in that bacon that could break a hardened German officer? The answer would expose a lie so big it had kept an entire nation in chains. But Klaus Weber almost didn't make it to Montana alive. His journey from the skies over Normandy to a prisoner camp in America involved a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. June 7th, 1944, Normandy coast. The day after D-Day. Klaus Weber sat in his shot-up Focke-Wulf 190 as it sank into the English Channel. The cockpit was filling with water. Cold, dark water that smelled like oil and blood. His left shoulder screamed with pain, dislocated when the American P-51 Mustang had riddled his plane with 50 caliber rounds. He'd been a fighter pilot for 6 years, flown 147 combat missions, shot down 11 Allied planes, never questioned his cause, never doubted, never hesitated. Until now. The water was up to his chest. He had maybe 30 seconds before the plane went under completely. His parachute was destroyed. His radio was dead. He was alone in the middle of the channel with Allied ships everywhere, and no chance of rescue from his own side. Klaus Weber, 32 years old, Hauptmann in the Luftwaffe, had a choice: fight the water and drown like a soldier, or surrender. Live as a prisoner, betray everything he'd been taught. He chose to live. American sailors pulled him from the water 20 minutes later. He was hypothermic, barely conscious, his lips blue and his hands numb. They wrapped him in blankets, gave him hot coffee, radioed for a Navy doctor. Klaus expected execution. A bullet to the head. Quick, efficient, the way the SS handled captured partisans. Instead, the doctor set his dislocated shoulder with professional care, gave him morphine for the pain, checked his vitals, and made notes on a clipboard like Klaus was a patient, not an enemy. Why, Klaus asked in broken English, his teeth still chattering. The American sailor, a kid from Nebraska who couldn't have been more than 20, just shrugged. Geneva Convention, buddy. You're a POW now, not a criminal. Criminal. The word stuck in Klaus's mind like a splinter. He had dropped bombs on London civilians, watched the fires spread below him, knowing children were dying, knowing it was murder dressed up as war. He was a criminal. He'd just never let himself think about it before. But these Americans treated him like a soldier. Not a monster, not a fanatic, just a man who'd been on the wrong side of a fight. It was the first crack in the wall, small, barely visible. But cracks have a way of spreading. Klaus Weber was born in Munich in 1912. His father owned a beer hall, a good business in a city that loved its beer. The family wasn't rich, but they were comfortable, respectable. His mother made schnitzel on Sundays. His father told jokes that made the customers laugh. Life was good. Then came the hyperinflation of 1923. Klaus was 11 years old when he watched his father carry a wheelbarrow full of worthless money to buy a loaf of bread. 11 when the savings his parents had built over 20 years became worthless paper overnight. 11 when his father stopped telling jokes and started drinking alone in the empty beer hall that nobody could afford to visit anymore. By 1930, the beer hall was gone. His father was broken. His mother took in washing to keep food on the table. Klaus was 18, angry and looking for someone to blame. That's when the party found him. They offered answers: order, purpose, pride. They said Germany had been stabbed in the back by traitors and Jews and communists. They said the fatherland could be great again if only Germans would believe in their own superiority. Klaus grabbed those answers like a drowning man grabs rope. By 1933, he believed. By 1939, he was killing for that belief. By 1944, it was the only truth he knew, until the bacon. But that comes later. Klaus was built like his aircraft, lean, hard, efficient. A scar ran along his left jaw from a bar fight in 1938, back when he still drank and brawled like his father used to. His hands were a mechanic's, hands scarred and strong, the kind of hands that could strip an engine or snap a man's neck with equal ease. He'd earned his Iron Cross the same way he'd earned everything: through violence, through precision, through loyalty to a cause that gave his life meaning. Now he sat in the hold of an American transport ship wrapped in a U.S. Navy blanket, drinking American coffee and trying not to think about what came next. 3 weeks on a transport ship. Klaus and 36 other Luftwaffe officers, all captured in the Normandy campaign. They kept their military bearing, their discipline. They sang German songs quietly at night, reminded each other of who they were, what they represented. Oberst Heinrich Baumer was the senior officer, 53 years old, a veteran of the Great War, a true believer in discipline and hierarchy. He had a face like chiseled stone and eyes that never softened. Baumer addressed them in the ship's hold on the third day at sea. "Gentlemen, we are prisoners, but we are still Germans. We accept no charity. We show no weakness. We maintain our dignity. The Americans will try to break us with soft treatment. It's their way of mocking German strength. They'll feed us, give us comfortable beds, treat us like guests. Don't fall for it. It's all designed to make us forget who we are, to make us grateful to our captors, to turn us into collaborators." The men nodded. Klaus nodded with them. He believed Baumer. The man was a rock, unchanging, unbreakable. But Klaus had noticed something during the voyage. The American guards didn't act like conquerors. They didn't gloat or mock or humiliate. They just did their jobs. They shared cigarettes with prisoners who asked. They made jokes in English that the Germans didn't understand but laughed at anyway because the tone was friendly. They treated enemy officers with casual indifference rather than cruelty or contempt. It was unsettling. Klaus had been trained to see Americans as either weak fools or brutal savages. These men were neither. They were just men, doing a job, going home when their shift ended, playing cards and talking about baseball and girls back home. One guard, Sergeant Mike Patterson from Texas, had offered Klaus his Zippo lighter when Klaus's matches ran out. Klaus accepted stiffly, expecting mockery, waiting for the punchline, the humiliation. Instead, Patterson just said, "Keep it." Got 3 more back in my bunk. The lighter was engraved, Sergeant M. Patterson, Austin, Texas, 1942. Klaus kept it. He didn't know why. It felt like accepting a gift from an enemy, which was dangerous, which meant something he wasn't ready to examine. But he kept it anyway, hidden in his pocket, and sometimes late at night he'd take it out and run his thumb over the engraving and wonder what Austin, Texas looked like. November 1944, Montana. Klaus had never seen anything like it. Mountains that made the Alps look like foothills. Sky so big, it felt like falling upward into infinity. Cold so clean and sharp, it burned your lungs like breathing knives made of ice. The camp itself was strange. Not what he'd expected at all. No barbed wire, just wooden fences, the kind you'd see around a farm. Barracks that looked almost comfortable with real windows and stoves for heat. A parade ground, a mess hall, a recreation building where prisoners could read or play cards. "It looks like a summer camp," one of the younger officers muttered. Bomber's voice was hard. It's a trick. They want us comfortable, so we'll talk. So we'll betray secrets. Remember, gentlemen, name, rank, serial number. Nothing more. But Klaus was thinking about something else. On the train from New York to Montana, he'd seen America through the window. Farms that stretched to the horizon. Towns with churches and schools and houses with porches. Cars everywhere. Ordinary people driving cars as casually as Germans rode bicycles. In Germany, only the rich had cars. In America, farmers had cars. Factory workers had cars. Even the Negro soldiers he'd seen at the port had cars. What kind of country gave cars to everyone? What kind of wealth was this? Sergeant Daniel Morrison watched the German officers file off the train. He'd been running POW camps for 2 years now, ever since his wife Helen died in a car accident, and he'd volunteered for stateside duty to escape the grief that followed him everywhere. These weren't like the Italian prisoners he'd processed before. Those men had been young, demoralized, grateful to be out of the war. These were Luftwaffe officers, true believers. Hard men with hard faces and eyes that still held fire. Think they'll give us trouble, his assistant asked. Morrison shrugged. Depends. Depends if they're smart enough to recognize kindness when they see it. He'd been thinking about this for weeks, about what Helen would have wanted him to do. She'd been a second-grade teacher, the kind who believed every child could be saved with the right amount of patience and love. She used to say that hatred was just fear-wearing armor, and the only way to crack armor was with persistent, relentless kindness. Morrison had thought that was naive back then. Now, 2 years after burying her, he wondered if she'd been the only one who really understood how the world worked. The Americans assigned work details, not hard labor, just maintenance, kitchen duty, groundskeeping, 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. The rest of the time, prisoners were free to read, write letters, exercise, organize their own activities. Klaus worked in the carpentry shop repairing furniture for the camp. The American foreman was an old cowboy named Dutch, maybe 60, with hands like leather and a slow, easy way of talking that reminded Klaus of his grandfather. Dutch showed Klaus how Americans built furniture. Simple joinery, strong, clean lines, no unnecessary decoration. You Germans make everything too complicated. Dutch said, demonstrating a mortise and tenon joint. We make it strong and simple. Does the job doesn't break last forever? That's the American way. Strong and simple, Klaus wanted to argue. To defend German engineering, German precision, German superiority and craftsmanship. But watching Dutch work, watching those old scarred hands shape wood with casual mastery, he couldn't find the flaw in the American way. Strong and simple. Maybe that was enough. Every evening, Oberst Baumer held informal meetings in the barracks, reminding the men of their duty, quoting party doctrine, maintaining morale and discipline. Gentlemen, remember, America is a nation without culture, without discipline, without soul. They have money and machines, but they have no spirit, no greatness. They're a mongrel nation of immigrants with no shared blood, no shared history. They won this war with numbers and industry, not with courage or virtue. We are superior not in material, but in essence, in blood, in spirit. Hold to that truth. Never forget who you are. Klaus recited the words in his mind like a catechism he'd memorized years ago, but they were starting to sound hollow, like words repeated so many times they'd lost their meaning. He'd noticed things, small things, details that didn't fit the narrative. The American guards were relaxed but professional. Not cruel, not weak, just competent. They did their jobs without drama, without needing to prove anything. The camp doctor was a Jewish-American captain named Stein. Klaus had been taught that Jews were subhuman, cowardly, parasitic. But Dr. Stein treated German prisoners with the same care he gave American soldiers. Klaus had watched him set a young lieutenant's broken arm, gentle and thorough, explaining what he was doing in simple German, making sure the boy wasn't afraid. Those were the hands of a healer, not a parasite, a healer. The food was adequate, not great but regular and sufficient. Beans, bread, coffee, occasional meat, more than many Germans had back home by late 1944. Klaus knew this because the Red Cross letters that occasionally got through told stories of hunger, of ration cards that bought less every month, of children going to bed with empty stomachs. Here in an enemy prison camp, Klaus ate better than in his mother. One night, a young German lieutenant, 23 years old, shot down on his second mission, started crying in his bunk. Homesick, traumatized, broken by the weight of everything he'd lost. Klaus expected Bomber to reprimand him, to tell him to be a man, to maintain discipline, to stop showing weakness that might encourage the Americans to see them as defeated. Instead, Bomber sat beside the boy, put a hand on his shoulder and said quietly, "It's all right, son. You fought with honor. There's no shame in grief. We grieve because we loved. And love is never weakness." It was a human moment, a father comforting a son. It reminded Klaus that even inside all the ideology, all the doctrine, all the talk of blood and soil and destiny, there was still something deeper, something older than politics. Men caring for men, fathers protecting sons. That night, Klaus heard American guards talking outside the barracks. Their voices drifted through the window into the cold darkness. "You think these Krauts really believed all that master race bullshit? Some of them, yeah. But I bet most were just scared kids following orders. Like us. Still killed our guys. Yeah. But the war's over for them now. They're just men. Same as us. Hungry, cold, far from home. My dad always said the only difference between soldiers is which flag they salute." Klaus lay awake staring at the ceiling of the barracks. Just men. Same as us. The phrase haunted him. It crept into his dreams. It was there when he woke up. It followed him through his work shifts, through his meals, through every moment of every day. Just men. Same as us. If that was true, then everything else was a lie. Early December. Snow came to Montana, turning the camp into a winter postcard. Klaus had never seen American snow before. It seemed cleaner than European snow. Whiter, somehow purer, like even the weather was better here. What Klaus didn't know was that Sergeant Morrison was planning something that would violate protocol, risk his career, and change 37 men's lives forever. Morrison had an idea. A dangerous, probably stupid idea that his commanding officer would hate and his fellow sergeants would call naive. Christmas was coming, and these German officers, enemy or not, were far from home. Morrison had been far from home during the Great War. He remembered how it felt. The loneliness, the ache for family, the way Christmas away from home could break something inside you if you weren't careful. He approached Captain Brennan, the camp commander, by the book officer who valued order above all else. "Sir, I want to do something for the German officers, for Christmas." Brennan looked up from his paperwork, suspicious. "What kind of something? A real Christmas breakfast? American style? Turkey, bacon, eggs, fresh bread, real coffee, hash browns, maybe some pie. Let them see how Americans celebrate. Morrison, these men bombed our allies. They killed Americans. Some of them probably killed my friends." "I know, sir, but they're also far from home on Christmas." And Morrison paused, choosing his words carefully. "My wife used to say that kindness was the best weapon against hate. That if you want to change someone's mind, you don't argue with them. You show them a better way." Brennan was quiet for a long moment. His face was hard to read. Finally, he said, "You have one day, Christmas morning. But if this backfires, if any of them use this against us, if headquarters finds out and doesn't like it, it's your ass on the line. Understood?" "Understood, sir. Thank you, sir." Morrison left before Brennan could change his mind. Klaus noticed the Americans preparing something. Extra supplies being delivered to the camp, the mess hall being cleaned more thoroughly than usual. Decorations appearing, paper chains in red and green, a small pine tree. Bomber noticed too. They're planning something. Christmas propaganda, no doubt. When they invite us, we refuse. We maintain our dignity. Understood, the officers murmured agreement. Klaus murmured with them. But inside he felt something else. Curiosity. These Americans kept surprising him. What would they do for Christmas? What did American Christmas even look like? He thought back to his last Christmas in Germany. December 1943. Munich. Klaus had been home on leave. The city was being bombed regularly. Food was desperately scarce. His mother had made a Christmas dinner from almost nothing. Watery soup with a few vegetables. Black bread so hard you had to soak it in the soup. A tiny piece of sausage she'd saved for 3 weeks, sliced so thin you could see through it. They'd sat in the cold apartment, no heat because coal was rationed, listening to bombs fall somewhere in the distance, pretending everything was fine. Pretending this was a real Christmas dinner. Pretending Germany was winning. His mother had cried, not from the bombs, From shame. Shame that she couldn't feed her son properly, that she couldn't give him a real Christmas. Klaus had held her, told her it didn't matter that they were fighting for a better future, that all the sacrifice would be worth it when Germany won, and Europe was united under the Reich, and prosperity returned. Now, a year later, sitting in an American prison camp, he wondered what future they had actually been fighting for. What had all the sacrifice bought? His father was dead killed in an air raid. His mother was alone, starving, living in a city that was being destroyed brick by brick. Germany was losing. Everyone knew it, even if nobody said it out loud. What had it all been for December 24th evening, the day before Christmas? Sergeant Morrison came to the barracks. He stood at the entrance, cap in hand, looking almost nervous. "Gentlemen," he said in careful, heavily accented German. He'd been practicing. "Tomorrow is Christmas. We would be honored if you would join us for breakfast. A real American Christmas breakfast." The Germans stared at him in silence. Bomber stood his face hard. "We decline. We are prisoners, not guests. We will not participate in propaganda." Morrison nodded slowly, like he'd expected this. "I understand, Oberst. I respect your position, but the invitation stands. We'll be serving at 8 in the morning. Any man who wishes to come is welcome. No pressure, no tricks, just breakfast, just Christmas." He put his cap back on, nodded respectfully, and left. In the silence that followed, one of the younger officers whispered, "What's an American Christmas breakfast?" An older man, a navigator named Franz, who'd lived in New York before the war, said quietly, "If it's real American and not just rations, then bacon. Real bacon, thick cut crispy, eggs with actual butter. Fresh bread, not the sawdust stuff we've been eating. Coffee made from real beans, not acorns or chicory. Hash browns fried in bacon grease. Maybe pie." He paused and his voice got softer, almost wistful. "If it's real American Christmas, it'll be more food than we've seen in 2 years. The barracks went absolutely silent. Every man was thinking the same thing. How long had it been since they'd tasted real food, real bacon, real butter? For Klaus, it had been 3 years. 3 years since he'd eaten anything that didn't taste like poverty and war. That night, Klaus couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about his mother's watery soup, about German children with swollen bellies from malnutrition, about American guards who had 3 Zippo lighters to spare, about a country so wealthy it could give cars to farmers. What if everything he'd been taught was backwards? What if America wasn't weak because of its freedom? What if it was strong because of it? The thought was terrifying, because if that was true, then Germany had been wrong. Not just wrong about who would win the war, wrong about everything, wrong about strength and weakness, wrong about superiority and inferiority, wrong about what makes a nation great, wrong about everything Klaus had built his entire adult life around. 5 in the morning, Christmas Day. Klaus woke to the smell. Bacon, real bacon frying in butter. The smell drifted through the cold Montana air into the barracks like a ghost of every Christmas Klaus had ever known before the war. Rich, smoky, savory, the smell of abundance, of fat and meat and salt. The smell of a country that had never known hunger. Every man in the barracks was awake. Klaus could hear them breathing in the darkness. Nobody spoke. They just lay in their bunks breathing in that impossible smell and remembering what real food used to taste like. At 6:30, Baumer sat up. "Gentlemen, I remind you, we are German officers. We do not beg. We do not accept charity from our enemies. We maintain our dignity even in defeat, especially in defeat." Klaus sat up too. He looked at Baumer, at this hard old man who'd fought in 2 wars, who'd never bent, who'd survived by being harder than everything the world threw at him. Oberst Klaus said carefully, "With respect, what if this isn't charity? What if it's just Christmas?" Baumer's face hardened. "There is no just Christmas between enemies." Klaus stood. He'd made a decision. "Then I'll be the first to betray my country by eating bacon." Several men laughed. Nervous, shocked, disbelieving laughs. Baumer pointed at Klaus. "If you accept their food, you accept their superiority. You admit we were wrong." Klaus pulled on his boots. Maybe we were. The barracks erupted, half the men shouting at Klaus, half standing to join him, Baumer's authority cracking like ice under pressure. Finally, Baumer said coldly, "Fine, go. See if American bacon makes you less German. See if it fills the hole where your loyalty used to be. Klaus walked to the door. Behind him, he heard footsteps. He turned. 23 men were following him. 14 stayed with Baumer. Klaus looked back through the window. He saw Baumer standing alone in the barracks, rigid and isolated, watching them go. The old soldier's face held something Klaus had never seen there before. Fear. Not fear of Americans, not fear of defeat. Fear that he might be wrong. That everything he'd believed, everything he'd fought for, everything he'd sacrificed might have been based on a lie. And if Baumer could doubt, then anything was possible. Klaus walked across the snow-covered yard toward the mess hall. 23 men followed. The building glowed yellow in the gray dawn. The smell of cooking grew stronger with each step. Bacon, coffee, bread, butter, all the things they'd been told America was too weak and decadent to produce in wartime. An American private held the door open. Young kid, maybe 19, with a nervous smile. "Merry Christmas, sirs." Klaus paused. The American had called them sirs, not prisoners, not enemies, officers. The word carried respect, recognition of rank of service, of shared military culture that transcended flags. Klaus stepped inside and his world changed. Inside the mess hall, the light was almost blinding after months of dim barracks and gray Montana skies. Every bulb burned bright, casting a warm glow that made the room feel like something from a dream. The kind of dream you have when you're hungry and cold and far from home, the kind you wake up from feeling worse than before you slept. But this wasn't a dream. Klaus stood just inside the door with 23 other German officers clustered behind him, like refugees, which was what they were. Refugees from certainty, from the world they thought they knew. The mess hall had been transformed. Paper chains in red and green hung from the ceiling, handmade by American soldiers, with more enthusiasm than skill. A small pine tree stood in the corner, decorated with paper stars that caught the light. The long tables were covered with white tablecloths, actual white linen, not the oilcloth usually used for prisoner meals. Each place had been set with care. A real plate porcelain, not tin, a knife, a fork, a spoon, a cloth napkin folded into a triangle. Simple things, common things in America. Luxuries beyond imagining for men who'd been eating from metal trays for months. And the food. Klaus's senses couldn't process it all at once. The sight of it, the smell, the impossible abundance of it. Visual, platters piled high with bacon. Thick-cut, crispy, glistening with fat in the electric light. Scrambled eggs yellow as sunshine still steaming. Hash browns golden brown and crispy at the edges. Stacks of toast with butter melting on top. Pitchers of milk, actual fresh milk. Coffee urns with steam rising like incense. Smell. Bacon grease and butter and fresh bread and real coffee. Not the ersatz garbage they'd been drinking. Real coffee made from real beans grown in South America and shipped to America and brewed for German prisoners. The smell of abundance. The smell of a country that had never known hunger. That didn't understand what hunger even meant. Sound, bacon still sizzling in pans somewhere in the kitchen. American guards talking quietly, relaxed at ease. Christmas music playing from a radio, Bing Crosby singing White Christmas in that smooth voice that made Klaus think of snow and safety and everything the war had stolen. Klaus had bombed factories in England. He'd shot down Allied planes and watched them spiral into the sea. He'd killed men, good men, probably men with families and dreams and favorite songs. He'd done all of this without hesitation because he'd believed it was necessary, believed he was fighting for something that mattered. But standing in that mess hall, looking at more food than his entire family had seen in a year, he felt something he'd never felt before in his entire adult life: shame. Deep, crushing, absolute shame. Because this food, this absurd abundance, proved everything. Proved that Germany had been starving while America grew fat. Proved that the master race was begging for scraps while the mongrel nation threw feasts. Proved that every single thing the party had taught him was a lie designed to keep him angry enough to kill and scared enough not to ask questions. Sergeant Morrison stepped forward. He'd changed into a clean uniform for the occasion, Klaus noticed, showing respect, treating this like something that mattered. Morrison spoke in German, simple but clear, the accent heavy but the words carefully chosen. "Gentlemen, today is Christmas. In America, Christmas means family and food and peace. You are far from your families. But today you are not our enemies. You are our guests. Please sit." Eat. This is not charity. This is what Christmas means in America. This is what we do. He paused and something changed in his face. Something softer, more vulnerable. My wife died 2 years ago. Car accident. Black ice on a Montana road. She used to say that sharing a meal was the fastest way to remember we're all human. That breaking bread together breaks down walls. I think she was right. So today we break bread. Together. From one soldier to another. He gestured to the tables. Merry Christmas, gentlemen. Welcome. What Morrison didn't tell them, what he couldn't tell them yet, was why he'd really organized this meal. The full truth would only come out months later in a letter that would make Klaus weep for the third time in his adult life. But that comes later. Klaus sat down slowly like a man approaching something fragile that might shatter if he moved too fast. Franz the navigator, who'd lived in New York before the war, sat beside him. Across the table, a young pilot named Johann looked absolutely terrified, like he was waiting for the trap to spring. What do we do? Johann whispered in German. Franz's voice was quiet, almost reverent. We eat. We eat, and we remember this moment for the rest of our lives. Because this is the moment we learn what we've been fighting against. An American soldier came around with a platter of bacon. Sergeant Patterson, the Texan who'd given Klaus the Zippo lighter. He served each German officer with a smile that seemed genuine, placing bacon on plates with the careful attention you'd give honored guests. When he reached Klaus, he said in broken German, extra crispy, Texas style, the way my mama makes it. Klaus looked down at his plate. 6 strips of bacon. More meat than he'd eaten in a month. The fat was still bubbling slightly. The smell made his stomach clench with hunger so intense it was almost painful. The kind of hunger that makes you forget everything else, makes you animal instead of human. He picked up 1 strip with his fingers. It was hot, almost too hot to hold. The fat left grease on his skin. He raised it to his mouth and the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Klaus bit down. The bacon crunched. Salt and smoke and fat exploded across his tongue like a bomb going off inside his mouth. It was real. After years of ersatz, everything ersatz coffee made from acorns, ersatz butter made from chemicals, bread made with sawdust. When flour ran short, this was real food. He chewed slowly, trying to make it last, trying to memorize every second of this moment. The bacon was thick-cut, perfectly cooked, with a sweetness underneath the salt that he didn't expect. American bacon. Made from American pigs fed on American corn, raised on farms that had never been bombed, never been burned, never known what war looked like up close. Klaus swallowed, reached for another piece, ate it faster this time, then another. His hands started shaking and he couldn't make them stop. Because this bacon, this stupid, simple, perfect bacon proved everything he'd been taught was a lie. Germany was starving. Children were eating potato peels and calling it dinner. His mother had cried over a piece of sausage so small you could see through it. Old people were dying from malnutrition in the streets of Munich, in Berlin and Hamburg. America was frying bacon for enemy prisoners. Thick cut, extra crispy, Texas style. The inequality of it. The obscene, impossible inequality of it. Not because America was stealing from someone else, but because America had built something that produced this kind of abundance naturally, easily, without needing to conquer anyone or steal anything or make anyone else poor. Klaus set down the 4th piece of bacon. His vision blurred. He tried to breathe, but his chest was too tight. Tried to speak, but his throat closed up. Tried to hold it together, but he couldn't. He cried, not quiet, dignified tears that you could hide by looking down or turning away. Loud, shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep in his chest, somewhere he didn't know existed. He covered his face with his greasy hands and wept like a child who'd just lost everything and found it again in the same moment. Around the table, other German officers were crying too. Franz with his head down, shoulders shaking. Johann with tears streaming down his young face, not even trying to hide them. A major named Otto, who'd won the Knight's Cross, weeping openly, past caring what anyone thought. The American soldiers stood, watching frozen in place. Some looked uncomfortable, like they'd stumbled into something private and didn't know whether to stay or leave. Others had tears in their own eyes. Patterson turned away, facing the wall, one hand over his face. Morrison walked over to Klaus's table. He didn't say anything. Just put his hand on Klaus's shoulder and squeezed once. A gesture of comfort. of understanding, of shared humanity that transcended flags and uniforms and all the stupid reasons men kill each other. Klaus looked up at him through tears, his face wet and his dignity gone. Why, he managed to say in English, "Why are you kind?" Morrison's face was sad in a way that looked old, like he'd been sad for a long time and had just learned to carry it better. Because hatred is easy. Any fool can hate. Kindness is what takes courage. My wife taught me that. She said the world has enough hate already. To the next weeping German officer, to the next weeping German officer offering the same quiet comfort. Slowly, gradually, the crying subsided. The men wiped their faces with the cloth napkins that were too nice for wiping tears, but served the purpose anyway. They ate. They ate like men who'd forgotten what plenty felt like. Klaus ate until his stomach hurt, until he felt almost sick from the unaccustomed richness. Bacon and eggs and hash browns and toast with real butter and strawberry jam that tasted like summer. Coffee with actual sugar and real cream that turned it golden brown. He ate, and with every bite, he felt another piece of the old Klaus dying. The Klaus who'd believed the propaganda, who'd thought German superiority was real, who'd convinced himself that bombing civilians was necessary because the cause was righteous. That Klaus was dying and Klaus didn't mourn him. Patterson came back around with fresh platters. More bacon, gentlemen. Every German officer at the table held out their plates like children, like men who'd been hungry so long they'd forgotten that food could be something other than survival, that eating could be pleasure instead of just fuel. Private Tommy Sullivan stood near the kitchen, watching the German officers eat and cry and eat some more. He was 21 from Boston, had been in the Army for 8 months, and had never seen combat. Never would see combat. The war was winding down, and Tommy would spend it stateside safeguarding prisoners. His older brother Mike had died at Normandy. June 6th, killed in the first wave on Omaha Beach by German machine gun fire. Germans like these men, maybe exactly these men for all Tommy knew. Tommy had hated them, hated every German with a pure, clean hatred that felt righteous and good and justified. But watching them cry over bacon, watching grown men break down because someone showed them basic human kindness, they just looked like his dad after the Depression. After years of unemployment and shame. After WP, they finally gave him work and the family could eat again. That same look of broken men discovering hope, discovering that maybe the world wasn't entirely cruel after all. Tommy walked over to the major's table. Otto, the one with the Knight's Cross who'd been crying the hardest. "Your English good?" Tommy asked. The major nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Some, yes, I understand. My brother died at Normandy, June 6th. The major went pale. He set down his fork. "I am sorry, truly sorry." "Yeah," Tommy poured coffee into the major's cup, watching the steam rise. "Me too, but I don't think you killed him. Just like you didn't try to starve my family during the Depression. War's bigger than us, you know, bigger than any of us. We're just the ones who get caught in it." The major looked at him with wet eyes that held something like gratitude. "Yes, war is bigger. We are very small inside it." Tommy nodded and moved on. He didn't forgive. Wasn't sure he could forgive or even wanted to. But he'd looked into the enemy's face and seen a man, not a monster. Seen someone's son and brother and maybe father. Seen humanity where he'd been taught to see only evil. That was something. Maybe not forgiveness, but something, Antoine. As the eating slowed and stomachs filled, talking began. Hesitant at first, like testing ice to see if it would hold weight. Then more open as the ice proved solid. Franz translated for those whose English was weak or non-existent. Germans and Americans started comparing notes, finding common ground in the universal language of soldiers complaining about officers and weather and food. "Where are you from?" "Munich." "You, Texas." "Little town called Fredericksburg. Ever heard of it, Num?" "Is it nice? Best place on earth? Got this thing called barbecue. Makes this bacon look like nothing." Laughter. Genuine laughter. German and American mixing together like the smoke from two different fires rising into the same sky. Morrison sat with Klaus and Franz. They talked about aircraft. Morrison had been an aircraft mechanic before the war, worked on crop dusters in Montana, knew engines the way priests know prayers. "Your Focke-Wulf 190 is a beautiful machine," Morrison admitted. "Clean lines, powerful engine, good engineering." Klaus nodded, feeling strange pride in his aircraft mixed with shame about what he'd used it for. But your P-51 Mustang, longer range, better high-altitude performance. When I saw Mustangs escorting bombers all the way to Berlin, I knew we'd lost the air war. You can't win when the enemy can fly anywhere they want, and you can't. Morrison smiled sadly. You're a straight shooter. A lot of your boys still think Germany can win. Klaus looked at his empty plate, at the grease stains and crumbs that were all that remained of abundance. Anyone who still believes that isn't looking at reality. You have everything: industry, resources, an entire continent untouched by bombs. We have pride and propaganda. Pride doesn't fuel tanks. Propaganda doesn't stop bullets. But Klaus was about to learn that America had something more dangerous than tanks or planes or industrial capacity. Something that would become the Cold War's secret weapon, more powerful than nuclear bombs, more effective than any military force. The ability to make enemies into friends, to turn defeat into transformation, to plant seeds in frozen ground and trust that spring would come eventually. The mess hall door opened, letting in a gust of cold Montana air. Oberst Baumer stood in the doorway alone. His 14 loyal officers had finally abandoned him, drawn by the smell of bacon and the sound of laughter, unable to resist what every other human being in the camp had already discovered. Baumer looked at the scene before him. His officers eating with Americans, laughing, talking, trading stories like old friends instead of enemies. He looked at Klaus, bacon grease still on his chin, smiling at something Morrison had said. Something broke in the old soldier's face, some wall that had been holding back the flood for too long. He walked in stiffly, sat at an empty table by himself, sat like a man who just realized he was wrong about everything and didn't know how to process that information. Morrison saw him, brought him a plate personally piled high with bacon and eggs and hash browns. Set it down in front of Baumer with respect, with the deference you show to rank, even when rank doesn't mean what it used to. Oberst Morrison said in German, "Welcome, I'm glad you came." Well, Baumer looked at the bacon, at the eggs, at the abundance that proved every single thing he'd built his life on was a lie. His hands trembled as he picked up a fork. He ate one bite, chewed slowly, swallowed, then another bite. Then he set down the fork and stared at his plate like it held the answer to a question he didn't know how to ask. "We lost," he said in German to no one in particular. His voice was quiet but carried in the sudden silence. "We lost the moment we believed the lie." Klaus understood. Baumer wasn't talking about the military war. That was already over, already decided. He was talking about the war of ideas, the battle between what Germany had become and what America represented. We lost because we thought strength meant making others weak. We lost because we thought greatness meant conquest. We lost because we believed abundance required theft. He gestured at the plates, at the food, at the casual generosity of a country that could feed its enemies without thinking twice. They have this because they built it, not by stealing, not by conquering, by building, by letting people be free and trusting that freedom would create value instead of chaos. Baumer looked up at Morrison, switched to broken English. "You are not weak. We were told America weak, soft, no culture, no discipline." Morrison smiled, that sad smile Klaus was starting to recognize. "And you believed it because you wanted to, because it was easier than admitting we might have built something better. Not perfect. God knows we're not perfect. But better than the alternative." "Not better," Baumer said firmly. "Old pride dying hard, then quieter with the sound of a man surrendering. Different. You are different." Morrison poured Baumer coffee. Sugar and cream already on the table there for the taking. "Yeah, we're different. We're messy and loud and we argue about everything. But that mess is our strength. Because when everyone's free to build their own life, amazing things happen. Things you can't force. Things you can't control. Things that just grow naturally when you give them room." He sat down across from Baumer. Two soldiers, two veterans of wars that had broken them in different ways. "Oberst, let me tell you something my wife used to say. She said that empires built on force always fall, but communities built on freedom last forever. Because force requires constant pressure, but freedom just requires trust. And trust compounds. It grows. It spreads." Baumer drank his coffee, real coffee, sweet and rich, and proof that everything he'd believed about American decadence was backwards. They weren't weak because they valued comfort. They were strong because they'd built a system that created comfort for everyone, not just the elite. After breakfast, after the plates were cleared and the last of the bacon was gone, Morrison stood and clinked a spoon against his coffee cup. Gentlemen, the meal is finished. But if you'd like, we thought we'd show you something, a real American tradition. What tradition? Franz translated for the group. Patterson grinned that big Texas grin. Football. We're starting a game in an hour. Officers versus enlisted. You Krauts want to watch, or better yet, want to play. The Germans looked at each other confused. Play sports with their captors. Was this another test? Another trick? Klaus stood. Decided, I'll play. 10 others stood too, including Baumer slowly. Like standing took more courage than flying combat missions ever had. An hour later, Klaus found himself on a muddy field wearing borrowed American athletic clothes. They were comically large because American sizes were massive, being taught the incomprehensible rules of American football by a Texas cowboy who talked too fast and used words Klaus didn't know. Okay, so you run with the ball, but these guys try to tackle you. Patterson demonstrated by grabbing Klaus in a bear hug. But you can throw it forward. See, that's the weird part. And every time you make it 10 yards, you get 4 more tries, make another 10 yards. Makes sense. None whatsoever, Klaus said. Patterson laughed. Yeah, nobody really understands it. We just play and figure it out as we go. That's the American way. Make it up as you go along and hope it works out. The ball was snapped. Klaus didn't understand what was happening, but suddenly he was running and Americans were chasing him, and he had no idea where he was supposed to go, but he ran anyway because running felt good, felt free, felt like being alive instead of just surviving. Patterson tackled him hard, both of them going down in the Montana mud, sliding 3 feet before stopping. Patterson helped him up, grinning through the mud on his face. Not bad for a Kraut. Klaus grinned back, breathless and filthy, and happier than he'd been in years. Not bad for a Texan cowboy. They played for 2 hours. Germans and Americans on mixed teams, no one keeping score, no one caring who won. Just men running and tackling and laughing and getting covered in mud. Klaus caught a forward pass purely by accident and ran it into the end zone. His team, half German and half American, mobbed him, cheering, slapping his back, lifting him up like he'd just won the war instead of scored a meaningless touchdown in a game nobody was taking seriously. Standing there covered in mud, surrounded by men who'd been enemies that morning and were something else now, Klaus felt joy. Pure, simple, uncomplicated joy. The kind children feel before the world teaches them to be afraid. He'd spent 6 years being a soldier, being hard, being disciplined, being willing to kill and die for something he had been told mattered more than individual lives. Now he was playing a game in the mud with Americans, and it was the most meaningful thing he'd done in years. That night after the game, after everyone had washed off the mud and changed back into regular clothes, Morrison invited a small group of German officers to his quarters for coffee. Klaus, Franz Baumer, and Otto. Morrison's room was small and simple. A bed, a desk, a photograph of a woman in a wooden frame, her smile frozen in time. Your wife, Klaus asked, pointing to the photo. Yeah, Helen. 2 years gone, but it still feels like yesterday. I'm sorry, Klaus said, and meant it with the full weight of a man who'd lost his own mother to a war he'd helped perpetuate. Morrison poured coffee from his personal stash. The good stuff, not the weak brew they served in the mess hall. She was a teacher, 2nd grade. She used to say that children are children no matter where they're born, that if we could just feed every kid, give them all a good breakfast, we'd have no more wars. He distributed the cups. Sugar and cream passed around like communion. I didn't organize that breakfast for propaganda. I did it because Helen would have wanted me to. Because you're someone's son, someone's brother, someone's father maybe. And it's Christmas. And Christmas means remembering we're all human even when everything else tries to make us forget. Klaus felt his throat tighten again. 3rd time crying today, a new record. In Germany, we were told that Americans have no culture, no soul, just money and machines and empty materialism. Morrison smiled sadly. We were told Germans were all fanatics who'd fight to the death, that you'd never surrender, that you were a different species basically. Inhuman. I guess we were both lied to, Bomber spoke up, his English improving with each sentence. Why you are different, why America different from everyone else. Morrison thought about it, sipping his coffee while he chose his words. I think it's because we're not trying to be one thing. Germany wanted purity. One race, one language, one way of thinking, one leader, one vision. Russia's the same under Stalin, one party, one truth, one way or death. He gestured broadly, encompassing something bigger than the room. America is messy. We're Irish and Italian and Polish and black and Mexican and everything mixed together. We fight about it constantly, argue about who belongs and who doesn't. But that mess is our strength because no one can tell us what we're supposed to be. We're whatever we make ourselves. That's freedom. And freedom creates abundance because it unleashes everyone's potential instead of just the chosen few. Klaus leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Sergeant Morrison, Dan, I must tell you something. The truth. Morrison nodded, waiting. I bombed London, civilian areas, residential neighborhoods. I knew children would die. I did it anyway because I was told it was necessary. Was told the British were the enemy of civilization and had to be broken. I killed children, Dan. I murdered them from the sky and called it war. The room went silent. Even the Montana wind outside seemed to stop. Klaus continued, his voice cracking. Today you fed me bacon. You played football with me. You showed me kindness I don't deserve and will never deserve. And now I must live the rest of my life knowing that I killed children while you give Christmas breakfast to men who tried to kill you. He looked up, tears streaming again. How do I live with that? How do I carry that? Morrison set down his coffee cup. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. Klaus, listen to me. You didn't start this war. You didn't create the lie. You were, 20 years old when Hitler took power. A kid. Your country was broken and hungry, and someone gave you an enemy to hate in a uniform that made you feel strong. You didn't choose that. You were born into it. He paused. But now you have a choice. Right now, you can hold on to the hate and the guilt and let it destroy you. Or you can choose something else. You can choose to be better than what you were. You can't undo London. Nothing will undo that. But you can make sure the future is different from the past. Morrison leaned forward. Helen used to say that forgiveness doesn't make what someone did okay. It just means you're done carrying their poison. Maybe you can't forgive yourself today. Maybe not for years, but maybe someday. And in the meantime, you live. You choose good. You build instead of destroy. You plant instead of burn. Klaus nodded, unable to speak. Bomber cleared his throat. Sergeant Morrison, I have been soldier 35 years, 2 wars. I have seen terrible things, done terrible things. He looked at his scarred hands. Today, when I tasted that bacon, I understood. The lie was not just about America. The lie was that hate makes us strong. But hate made me weak, made me blind, made me eat Christmas breakfast alone while my men found kindness without me. The old soldier looked Morrison in the eye. You said we have choice. I choose to remember bacon and football, an American sergeant who showed old German soldier that mercy is real, that it exists, that strength can be kind. Morrison smiled. That's all any of us can do, Oberst. Choose to be better tomorrow than we were today. Choose to plant seeds instead of salt the earth. Choose to feed people instead of starving them. They sat together in that small room drinking coffee as the Montana night deepened outside. 4 men who'd been enemies, who'd killed each other's countrymen, who'd believed lies about each other. Now just men, drinking coffee, talking about wives and mothers and the future, planting seeds in frozen ground, trusting that spring would come eventually, trusting that bacon and football and simple human kindness could change the world more than bombs and hate ever would. And they were right. The seeds they planted that night would grow into forests, would change the weather, would help rebuild Germany as a democracy, would help America win the Cold War, not with weapons, but with the memory of what freedom tastes like. But that comes later. Tonight was just coffee and conversation and the slow work of becoming human again after years of being soldiers. The work of transforming enemies into friends, one meal at a time, one game at a time, one act of kindness at a time. Simple, strong, the American way. The days after Christmas held a strange quality, like the space between dreaming and waking when you're not sure which world is real. The routines remained the same. Roll call at dawn, work assignments, thin evening meals that tasted like cardboard after that one morning of abundance. But something fundamental had shifted in the Montana camp, something that couldn't be put back in its box. The women moved through their tasks differently now. They carried themselves with something that had been absent before. Not happiness exactly, not hope in any grand sense, but not quite despair either. Klaus worked in the carpentry shop, his hands shaping wood the way Dutch had taught him. Simple and strong. The American way. But his mind was somewhere else, replaying that Christmas morning over and over like a film reel stuck on repeat. Word spread through the American POW camp system like wildfire in dry grass. Guards at other facilities heard about Morrison's Christmas breakfast. Some thought it was soft, dangerous, the kind of thinking that would get men killed if the war was still hot. Others saw it differently, saw possibility where doctrine only saw rules. By February, 3 other camps had tried similar events. One in Wyoming served a Super Bowl party teaching confused German prisoners about the strange American religion of football and beer and men screaming at a radio. Another in Idaho organized a baseball demonstration that ended with a German major accidentally hitting a home run and running the bases backwards, while Americans laughed and cheered anyway. But Montana remained different, special, because Klaus and his fellow officers had something the others didn't. They'd been true believers who'd been converted not by force or argument, but by the simple act of someone being kind when they had every right to be cruel. March 1945. Morrison organized another event, a baseball game, American guards versus German prisoners. Klaus had never seen baseball before. The rules made no sense. You hit a ball with a stick and then ran in a square, and this was supposed to be exciting. Patterson spent 2 hours teaching him, demonstrating with infinite patience. Okay, so you hit the ball with this bat, right? Then you run to that base over there, first base. Then if the next guy hits it, you run to second. But if they catch the ball before it hits the ground, you're out. And 3 outs means your team stops batting and the other team gets to try. Klaus frowned. Why is it called a base if it's just a bag on the ground? Patterson laughed, a big Texas laugh that came from his belly. Hell if I know, Klaus. It's tradition. America runs on tradition and Coca-Cola and not asking too many questions about why we do things. Klaus learned to swing a bat, learned the satisfying crack when wood met leather and the ball flew, learned to slide into second base getting his prison uniform covered in Montana dirt, learned to spit sunflower seeds and call the umpire blind when a pitch looked outside. He hit a home run. Pure luck, really. A pitch that hung in the air too long, and Klaus swung with everything he had, and the ball sailed over the makeshift fence into the Montana wilderness. He ran the bases while Americans and Germans both cheered. Mixed teams, mixed loyalties, just men playing a game on a cold March afternoon, forgetting for a moment which uniform meant what. Rounding third base, heading for home plate, Klaus felt something he thought he'd lost forever when his Focke-Wulf went down in the channel. Joy. Simple, uncomplicated, childlike joy. The kind that doesn't ask questions or demand meaning. The kind that just exists in a moment of sunshine and grass and the sound of men laughing. Patterson met him at home plate, grinning wide. Not bad for a crowd. Klaus grinned back, breathless and muddy, and more alive than he'd felt in years. Not bad for a Texan cowboy who can't teach the rules properly. They played until the sun started setting, until fingers were too cold to grip the bat, until everyone was exhausted and happy and covered in dirt. Klaus stood with Patterson and France and Morrison and a dozen others, Americans and Germans, mixed together, passing around canteens of water and talking about nothing important. This, Klaus thought, this is what peace could look like. Not treaties and borders and politicians shaking hands. Just men standing together, tired and happy, having spent an afternoon hitting a ball with a stick. The Red Cross allowed prisoners to send limited mail. 1 letter per month, strictly censored, but at least it was something. A thread connecting them to the world they'd left behind. Klaus wrote to his mother in Munich. He'd been writing to her since November, never knowing if the letters got through, never receiving replies, but writing anyway because the alternative was admitting she might be dead, and he wasn't ready for that. Dearest mother, I'm well. The Americans treat us fairly, better than fairly. They treat us as men, not animals. I know you would not believe me if I told you everything, so I will tell you only this. Everything I believed about America was wrong. They are not weak. They are not without culture. They are strong in ways we never understood. Strong because of their freedom, not in spite of it. The war is lost, Mother. You know this. Everyone knows this, even if saying it out loud is still dangerous. But what comes after, I think it can be better than what came before. I have seen what kindness looks like. I have tasted what freedom produces. It tastes like bacon and coffee and the kind of plenty that doesn't need to conquer anyone else to survive. When I come home, I will help rebuild, but not the old Germany, not the one that needed enemies to feel strong, a new one that remembers American bacon and American baseball and the fact that our enemies showed us more mercy than our own leaders ever did. I love you, Mother. Stay safe. I will see you again. He sent the letter knowing German censors would probably intercept it. Knowing that admitting Germany was losing, admitting America was right, could be considered treason. He didn't care anymore. The truth had to be told, even if only he and his mother would ever know it. 2 months later, he received a reply. But it wasn't from his mother, Herr Weber. I regret to inform you that your mother, Frau Elisabeth Weber, passed away in January 1945 during an air raid on Munich. I am a Red Cross worker here in the city. I was asked by your mother's neighbor, Frau Greta Klein, to respond if any letters came for you. Your mother saved your letter, Herr Weber. She read it many times before she died. Frau Klein told me that your mother said this, and I write it here exactly as it was told to me. She said, my son has found hope. That is all a mother can ask, that her son survives and finds hope. I am very sorry for your loss. Your mother was by all accounts a good woman who suffered much. Klaus read the letter alone in the barracks during the evening free hour. The other men were playing cards, or writing their own letters, or just lying on their bunks, staring at nothing. He didn't cry. He'd cried too much already. Cried over bacon and football and kindness. He had no tears left for this. Instead, he walked outside into the March cold and looked at the mountains. Those massive, impossible mountains that made everything else feel small and temporary. His mother had died in January, 2 months ago, while he was here safe eating regular meals and learning to play baseball. While he was discovering that the enemy wasn't what he'd been taught. While he was starting to believe in something better than everything he'd fought for. She died knowing he was safe, knowing he'd found hope, and she'd called that enough. Klaus made a promise to the Montana sky and the ghost of his mother and whatever God might be listening. He would honor her. He would rebuild. He would be the new Germany she died believing in, the one that chose bacon over bombs, baseball over blood, kindness over the kind of strength that only knows how to destroy. May 8th, 1945. The war in Europe ended. In the Montana camp, American guards celebrated with loud music and beer and back-slapping joy. In the German barracks, men sat in silence that felt like a funeral. Klaus felt empty, not grief, not relief, just a vast, echoing emptiness where certainty used to live. The war he'd fought, the beliefs he'd held, the country he'd loved, all gone. 12 years of Nazi rule had ended in total, absolute, unconditional defeat. Germany wasn't just beaten, it was erased, split, occupied. The map redrawn by men in rooms far away from the rubble. Bomber stood up. The old officer looked smaller than he had 6 months ago, thinner, older. Like defeat had carved away everything that wasn't essential. Gentlemen, Germany has fallen, but we remain. We have a choice now. We can cling to the ashes of what was. We can tell ourselves we were right and the world was wrong. We can die bitter and broken, blaming everyone but ourselves. He paused, and Klaus saw something in the old man's eyes he'd never seen before. Humility. Or we can plant seeds in those ashes. Some of us learned something here. About kindness. About strength that doesn't come from making others weak. About freedom that creates abundance instead of stealing it. We take that home. We teach it. We rebuild Germany into something better than what we destroyed. The barracks was absolutely silent. Every man listening. Every man making a choice about what kind of person he would be when the prison gates finally opened. Klaus stood, then Franz, then Otto, then a young pilot named Johann, then others. One by one standing in a Montana barracks choosing to believe that defeat could be the beginning of something instead of just the end. 37 men pledging to build a better Germany, to be the seeds that Sergeant Morrison had planted with bacon and kindness and the radical idea that mercy wasn't weakness. The process of sending prisoners home would take months. Logistics, paperwork, transportation, the machinery of peace grinding forward slowly while men waited in camps and barracks and wondered what home even looked like anymore. Meanwhile, life in the Montana camp continued with a different feeling now. The war was over. These weren't enemy combatants anymore. Just men waiting to go home to a country that didn't exist the way they remembered it. Morrison arranged for the Germans to help build a new schoolhouse in a nearby Montana town. The community needed it. Local men were still overseas with the occupation forces. Labor was scarce. And Morrison thought maybe it would be good for everyone. Germans building something instead of destroying it. Americans and Germans working side by side, proving that former enemies could hammer nails together. They worked through May and June, mixing concrete, raising walls, installing windows. Klaus discovered he was good at finished carpentry, making window frames that fit perfectly, no gaps, the way Dutch had taught him. Simple and strong. Martha Henderson watched German prisoners building the schoolhouse where her grandchildren would learn to read. She was 60 years old, a rancher's widow with hands like leather and a face carved by wind and sun and grief. Her son had died at Anzio, killed by Germans. She'd hated them, hated every single one of them with a pure, clean hatred that felt righteous and justified and good. But watching these men work careful and precise, taking pride in their carpentry, making something beautiful that would outlast them, she saw what her son might have looked like from the other side. Just a young man following orders. Just someone's boy who'd ended up in the wrong uniform, in the wrong place. She baked cookies, brought them to the work site in a basket covered with a checkered cloth. For the workers, she said stiffly to Morrison, not looking at the Germans. Klaus saw her standing there, this old American woman, with grief written in every line of her face. He took off his cap, held it against his chest, and said in careful English, "Your son, we are sorry. We are very, very sorry." Martha's eyes filled. She nodded once, sharp and quick, then turned and walked away before the tears could fall where anyone could see them. But the next day she brought lemonade. The day after that, sandwiches. By the end of the week, she was sitting on the tailgate of her truck watching them work. And sometimes Klaus would catch her, almost smiling, when someone made a joke or when a board fit perfectly into place. Forgiveness didn't happen all at once. It happened in cookies and lemonade and sandwiches. It happened in small moments of choosing to see people instead of uniforms. One evening in June, Morrison called Klaus to his quarters, the same small room where they'd had coffee and talked about Helen and hate and the choice to be better. "Klaus, you're being repatriated next month. Back to Germany." Klaus nodded. He was ready, scared but ready. Morrison handed him a book, Democracy in America by Alexis de Tocqueville. German translation, worn and dog-eared. "Read it on the ship. It'll help you understand what you saw here. Why bacon and baseball matter more than you think." Klaus took the book, held it carefully like it was fragile. "Why give this to me?" "Because you're going to help rebuild Germany. And I want you to remember that democracy isn't weak. It's the strongest form of government ever created. Strong enough to feed its enemies bacon on Christmas. Strong enough to turn prisoners into carpenters building schoolhouses. Strong enough to win wars and win peace." Klaus looked at the book, at Morrison's sad, kind eyes, at this American sergeant who changed everything by choosing kindness when cruelty would have been easier. "Sergeant Morrison, Dan, you saved my life." Morrison shook his head. "No, I just reminded you that you had one worth saving. Big difference." They shook hands. Two soldiers. Former enemies. Friends. Brothers in the strange fraternity of men who'd chosen to be better than the worst things they'd done. "I'll never forget the bacon," Klaus said. Morrison smiled. "I know. But remember the why behind the bacon. Freedom creates abundance. Kindness creates loyalty. Mercy creates peace. That's the American way. Not perfect, but better than the alternative." Summer 1946. Klaus stepped off a train in what used to be Munich. The city was rubble. 90% destroyed. People living in bombed-out buildings with no roofs, no windows, no running water. Children begging for food. Old men sitting in the ruins with thousand-yard stares. He'd brought American chocolate bars. Morrison had filled his duffel with them, a care package for a broken country. Klaus gave them to children who looked at him like he was St. Nicholas and the Easter Bunny combined. He found work as a teacher. Germany desperately needed teachers. An entire generation needed to be re-educated, detoxed from 12 years of poison, taught to think instead of just obey. Klaus taught English and history and civics in a building that was mostly intact except for the west wall, which had a hole you could drive a truck through. They covered it with canvas and pretended it was a proper classroom. To every class, he told the same story. The story of Christmas morning in Montana. The story of bacon that broke a Nazi officer. The story of Americans who chose kindness when hate would have been justified. On Christmas 1944, I was a prisoner in America. I was their enemy. I had bombed their allies, killed their friends, fought to destroy everything they believed in. But on Christmas morning, they served me bacon. Real bacon. And football. And baseball. And kindness I didn't deserve and hadn't earned. I learned something that day that I want you to learn too. Hate makes you weak. It makes you stupid. It makes you destroy things you need and hurt people who could have been friends. Freedom makes you strong. Democracy makes you strong. Kindness makes you strong. We must rebuild Germany not with hate or dreams of revenge, but with these American values. Democracy, freedom, the rule of law, human dignity. The understanding that other people, even people who don't look like us or talk like us or pray like us, are still people, still human, still deserving of bacon on Christmas morning. The students listened, some believed, some didn't. But seeds were being planted, slowly, one classroom at a time. Franz became a journalist. He wrote articles about American democracy, about the Marshall Plan, rebuilding Europe, about why Germany must embrace Western values and reject the Soviet alternative. He wrote about Montana, about baseball and bacon, about Sergeant Morrison and the radical idea that mercy could be strategic, not just moral. That kindness could win wars that bombs couldn't. His articles were popular in the American zone. Less popular in the Soviet zone, where talking about American generosity could get you arrested for anti-communist propaganda. Otto became a politician in the new West German government. He pushed for reconciliation with America, for joining NATO, for aligning with democracy against Soviet totalitarianism. In every speech he mentioned bacon. It became his signature. His colleagues called him the Bacon Chancellor as a joke, but Otto wore it like a badge of honor. I was taught that Americans were weak and soft, he would say. Then they fed me bacon on Christmas morning when they could have let me starve. That bacon taught me more about strength than 12 years of Nazi propaganda. Real strength is being kind when you're powerful enough to be cruel. That's American strength. That's the strength we need. Bomber, the old soldier who tried to hold the line against American kindness, died in 1952. But before he did, he wrote a memoir. Der Speck, der mich brach, The Bacon That Broke Me. It became a bestseller in West Germany. A generation of young Germans born during the war or just after read about Christmas morning in Montana and learned that their fathers and grandfathers had been lied to, that the enemy had been better than the propaganda, that defeat had been the best thing that could have happened to Germany. Bomber's last words, according to his daughter, who published them in the memoirs afterward, were these: "Tell them I was wrong. Tell them Morrison was right. Tell them bacon matters." In 1955, Klaus received a letter from America, from Montana, from Sergeant Morrison, who was now just then retired from the army and working as a carpenter. "Klaus, I heard you're teaching in Munich, making young Germans into Democrats instead of fanatics. I'm proud of you, my friend. Proud in the way I'd be proud of a son if Helen and I had been blessed with children. I wanted you to know something. That Christmas breakfast wasn't my idea alone. My wife Helen had written in her diary years before she died. I found the entry after she passed. She wrote that if I ever had the chance to show kindness to an enemy, I should take it without hesitation. She believed kindness was contagious, like a virus that spreads from person to person, making everyone it touches a little more human. She was right. You're proof. And the Germany you're building is proof. And every student you teach who chooses democracy over dictatorship is proof. I'm retiring next year, thinking of opening a carpentry shop, making furniture that lasts instead of fighting wars that don't. Maybe you'll visit someday. I'll show you how we build barns in Montana, simple and strong, The American way. Stay good, my friend. You've earned it. Dan Morrison. Klaus wrote back immediately. They corresponded for years. Letters crossing the Atlantic carrying news of carpentry and teaching and grandchildren and the slow, steady work of building peace. 1965. 20 years after the war ended. Klaus Weber, now 53 years old, stood in front of his classroom in Munich. He'd taught English and American history for 19 years. His students had become lawyers and doctors and politicians and teachers. They'd rebuilt Germany into something unrecognizable from the rubble. Prosperous, democratic, allied with America against the Soviet threat. A knock on the classroom door. Klaus looked up from the chalkboard where he had been writing vocabulary words. An older American man stood in the doorway, gray-haired, wearing a simple suit that had seen better days with the kind of weathered face you get from working with your hands in the sun for decades. He looked familiar in a way Klaus couldn't quite place, like a photograph from long ago, like a ghost made solid. Herr Weber, the man said in accented German, "Do you remember American bacon?" Klaus's heart stopped. The chalk fell from his fingers. His vision blurred. Morrison they embraced in the doorway of that Munich classroom. Two old men who'd once been enemies holding each other while students watched in confused silence. "You came," Klaus said through tears. He didn't know he was crying. "You actually came. Had to see what you built. Had to see if the seeds grew." Klaus introduced Morrison to his students, told them the whole story, all of it, the bacon, the football, the baseball, the kindness that changed his life, and through him changed thousands of lives, because teaching is how you multiply yourself across time. Morrison added in slow, careful German, Klaus was one of 37 men who learned that Christmas morning that mercy is stronger than hate. Those 37 became teachers and journalists and politicians. They helped make West Germany what it is today. They chose democracy because they'd tasted what freedom produces. They chose America because America had chosen to be kind when it could have been cruel. He paused, looking at the young faces staring back at him. That's why we won the Cold War before it even started. Not with bombs or threats or walls, with bacon, with kindness, with the understanding that former enemies make the best friends because they know what the alternative looks like. That evening, Klaus and Morrison walked through rebuilt Munich. The city was beautiful again. Modern, gleaming. Not the old imperial Munich of Klaus's childhood, but something new. Something that looked forward instead of backward. They stopped at a Christmas market being set up in a square. December again. 21 years since that breakfast that changed everything. "Do they serve bacon?" Morrison asked, smiling that same sad, kind smile Klaus remembered from Montana. "The best bacon in Germany," Klaus said. "American style. My students love it. I taught them that bacon is freedom you can taste." Morrison laughed a sound like distant thunder. Helen would have loved that. She always said kindness was contagious, like planting seeds that grow into forests. They stood together watching German children play in the square. Free children in a free country, allied with America, protected by NATO, living in the peace that bacon had helped build. "Klaus, if I need to tell you something, the real reason I organized that Christmas breakfast." Klaus turned to look at his old friend. "Helen's diary. I told you about the entry, but I didn't tell you all of it. She wrote that every person you are kind to becomes a seed, and seeds grow into forests. And forests change the weather, change the climate, make rain where there was drought, make life where there was desert." Morrison's eyes were wet now. She wrote that if we wanted to change the world, we didn't need to fight harder. We needed to plant more seeds. She believed that with enough seeds, enough kindness, enough people choosing to be better than their worst impulses, we could turn enemies into friends and wars into memories. He gestured at the rebuilt city, the Christmas market, the free country, the children playing without fear. "I think she was right. Don't you?" Klaus looked at everything around him. The Germany he'd helped build from ashes and guilt and the memory of bacon on Christmas morning. The students he'd taught who were now teaching their own students. The politicians who quoted his stories in speeches. The journalists who wrote about Montana like it was a sacred place. One breakfast, one act of kindness, rippling out across 20 years. Across an ocean, across millions of lives. She was right, Klaus said. Seeds become forests, and forests change everything. They stood together as snow began to fall on Munich. American snow and German snow, meeting in the air between them indistinguishable from each other. Just frozen water falling from the sky. No nationality, no ideology. Just weather doing what weather does. Two old men, former enemies, brothers, standing in a free city in a free country, watching children play, and knowing that kindness, patient and persistent, implanted like seeds, had won something that bullets never could. Peace, real peace, the kind that lasts. Sergeant Daniel Morrison died in 1978. At his funeral in Montana, 7 old German men attended. They'd flown from Germany at their own expense to honor the American who'd changed their lives, with bacon and baseball, and the radical idea that mercy was stronger than hate. Klaus Weber gave the eulogy in English he had perfected over 30 years of teaching. This man fed me when I was his enemy, showed me kindness when cruelty would have been justified, taught me that strength comes from freedom, not from making others afraid. He planted a seed, and that seed became a forest. And that forest changed the weather of my entire life. Thank you, Dan, for the bacon, for the lesson, for proving that America's greatest strength was never its weapons. It was its willingness to treat enemies like humans and trust that humanity would respond to humanity. You were right. Helen was right. Seeds become forests, and forests change everything. Klaus Weber lived until 1993. In his will, he left one item to the Munich History Museum, a photograph from Christmas 1944 showing 37 German prisoners and 1 American sergeant standing together smiling in front of a decorated Christmas tree. The museum caption reads, "The day bacon defeated hate," because on Christmas morning, 1944, in a frozen Montana camp, one simple act of kindness planted seeds that would grow into forests. Those seeds became teachers and journalists and politicians. Men who rebuilt Germany as a democracy, who aligned with America against tyranny, who remembered that freedom tastes like bacon and sounds like baseball and looks like kindness when power could choose cruelty. The Cold War was won with missiles and money and the slow bankruptcy of Soviet communism. But it was also won with breakfast, with kindness, with the radical American idea that treating your enemy like a human being isn't weakness. It's strategy. Because the enemy you show mercy to today becomes the ally who remembers it for generations. Sergeant Morrison understood what Klaus Weber would take 20 years to fully grasp. Mercy isn't soft. Mercy is smart. Because kindness compounds like interest. It multiplies, it spreads. One person touches another who touches another until you have millions of people who remember that America chose to be good when it could have chosen to be cruel. That's the American way. Not just winning wars, winning hearts, winning minds. Winning the peace that matters more than any battlefield victory. One piece of bacon at a time. One act of kindness at a time. One seed planted in frozen ground waiting for spring, knowing that forests take time, but they always come if you're patient enough to let them grow. If you or someone you love served in World War II, share this story in their honor. The greatest generation understood what we sometimes forget, that strength without kindness is just cruelty, that kindness without strength is meaningless. But together, strength and kindness together, that's what makes America truly great. Not because we're perfect, not because we always get it right, but because when we do get it right, when we choose mercy over hate and generosity over revenge, we change the world in ways that last longer than any empire. Thank you for watching. God bless the men who chose kindness. God bless the seeds they planted. God bless America.